Sounds good, and thanks everyone for that. It's really interesting. It's good to be among so many colleagues in the waste management space. And I think it's a very nascent space, but it's really something of value to be doing and of potential, I think, very interesting commercial opportunities as well. So I have on my side, I already kind of give this background. I'm a data scientist by training. So, for us, like the whole starting point of Kabadiwalla Connect happened when I'd won enough money to do this complete census of the informal aggregators in Chennai. And we devised like simple app, like a data collection system, like a methodology for like walking every street essentially. And my goal was to just understand who these aggregators were, how much they were collecting, things like that. So it's really built around our work of mapping in Chennai. But the point that I really feel from that whole activity and from where we are right now is that, like, in the global south, this general region, which includes Africa, it includes Southeast Asia, includes Latin America, the dominant form of recovery is happening through the informal, quote unquote, informal supply chain. The informal supply chain is like the narrative of the informal supply chain in the world is kind of a one-dimensional kind of thing, where they just speak a lot about waste pickers, and especially a lot of funding agencies, a lot of folks, there's been a lot of work on the waste picker segment with almost like very little or zero attention paid to who the waste pickers are selling on, like how that ecosystem developed, which is because of these aggregators that are out there. However, we're all living in Indian cities, so we all have definitely seen a Kabadiwalla. In Chennai, they are a Pariya paper car, and we have seen them when we walk around. So we also know that there's something happening over there. So our basic point is, if we were to collect detailed baseline data in places where the dominant form of recovery is informal, then we can really increase the recycling rates. There's already really good examples, like PET in India, for example, is an amazing, like, just from a volume perspective. I'm not talking about health and safety at all. I'm talking just volume, like the volume that they're able to collect is pretty incredible. And it bodes really well for the opportunity for, low value plastic, and in fact, other types of material streams, textile, they're very material agnostic. So that's the basic point. And I normally give this talk with one of my colleagues, Stoker, who's not here today. So I have three segments, excuse me. So first, like, what does informal work in recycling look like, really, based on what we've been researching? What did we do, or what do we build on top of this philosophy of the informal supply chain? And the third is, I want to speak a little bit about the ambition we have to map 100 cities in the global south. And we say it like in the next 5 to 7 years. So the first thing that I think is very important to understand is, like, informality is a big problem. It's not like a side problem. It's a critical issue that the world has to solve. They say there's a study which says that 2 billion people work in the informal supply chain. And a lot of those folks are in Asia, the global south. And waste management is a typical place where you see the existence of a series of informal actors, even though, the end in some cases, PET, again, for example, the off-taker is actually a very formal guy and is looking at certification systems and things like that. So that's one point to keep in mind. I think another foundational note is that it's already, like, waste management in the global south, it's got a huge funding issue. Okay, it's not like the way municipalities give out contracts and the way they pay for those contracts is like not sustainable. Just to do landfilling, which is what everyone is doing right now, the most basic thing, it's too expensive for the municipality. And so this slide really, there's a World Bank study which says that what they call effective waste management, it can cost between 20 to 50% of the municipal budget. And now effective waste management is built on what they think waste management should look like based on what they have done and what they funded before and things like that, which are typically very centralized stuff, big transfer stations, diesel trucks going and picking up bins outside. Even if you do door-to-door collection, the centralized model of collection, it's in crisis, really. Like, where's the funding for it for a municipality? So it's really hampering the ability ultimately waste is a municipal government responsibility. It's one of the things that we sign off on, and so they have to play an active role. And so this idea of like, how do you bring them back in to be a major financial sponsor of whatever waste collection strategy is there needs to be solved. And currently it's in crisis. Like Chennai, for example, we generate 6,000 tons of waste every day. And most of that is just going to 2 landfills. These landfills are like marshlands. They're unsanitary landfills. So, we have very basic problems in municipal India, you could say. For us, plastic, when you look at the volume that is mismanaged and that gets leaked into the oceans and waterways, you can see that most of this comes from Asia, and you can see that it's one fraction that's being mismanaged, actually. It's just one fraction. We're mismanaging, honestly, we're mismanaging our wet waste, we're mismanaging our inert waste, we're mismanaging all of those elements. So we always try to bring back this idea that plastic is actually a subset of this mismanagement that we see at the city level. Urban India, there's a study which says 70 million tons every year we generate, and 90% of that goes to the landfill. And this is where the conditions for informal work sets in, right? The fact that 20 to 25% of the waste that a city generates is valuable. It's that dry waste component: paper, plastic, glass. In fact, when we did our survey in Chennai, we found that Kabadiwalla shops had set up in the 60s and 70s off the back of paper and metal. That's the starting point of the informal, quote unquote, supply chain for dry waste that got generated. Just the fact that there was value there. And before we did our mapping, there has been a lot of studies, very important studies on the informal supply chain. I won't go through this in detail, but I'll send you these slides, of course, so you can kind of take a look at it. But there were like 4 key facts that we saw that before I wanted to start mapping. Again, like, I'm from the development sector. My goal was very academic, and so that's I guess a point that I missed, which is like, I was initially collecting this data as a very academic exercise. So like really looking at high volume of data on different topics to kind of like tell a thing. And one of the things that I found that is very interesting in like the literature review, right, was they say the informal supply chain is collecting 20% of the recyclables that a city generates. Is that true? That's a big number, if it's true. It's millions of dollars worth of revenue, essentially. And the other thing that I found that was very interesting was that per ton, the informal supply chain, because they're keeping it away from the municipality, a study was done where they were saying that, hey, it saves money. It can save 25,000 rupees for the municipality for every ton that's going into the supply chain. But then, of course, what is the biggest issue? Waste pickers, for doing all of that work and having to choose between their health and livelihood when they put their hand into the bin and pick up the material, they're making such little money and they're living in very like hazardous conditions. In fact, the way like the waste moves in this supply chain is very like, there's a lot of issue with like health and safety in terms of like injuries, in terms of like getting diseases, things like that. So one of the things that I noticed also in the literature review was that nobody had a shared understanding of what do we call the person? What's the name of this person? Which is a crazy thing. We all, for example, like if I said the word waste picker to everybody in this room, and in any room, everybody immediately understands that person. We all have, we understand that person, right? We can see it. But then when we start talking about the aggregators, it gets very confusing. So this is a visual of like the top 20 most cited papers on informal work. And we just took the names that they used when they were talking about different people. And you can see it's all over the place. Some people are saying collector, some people are saying something. But then the aggregators, like, where do you factor them in? Are they a middleman? Are they a wholesaler? So one of my goals as a starting point for the data collection was to let almost the material flow define the actors. So I was looking very much at profiling people and finding the key data to help profile people, aggregators in the supply chain, to understand really how the supply chain works. And I wanted to come up with an evidence-based understanding of the levels of like, what is happening in this material flow. And so, yeah, and, we won these grants. So there's a lot of provenance to this data set also, which was really exciting. We were able to, for example, the funding ultimately came from the World Bank. And, the first report that we publish is published on the World Bank's website, where we're kind of presenting the findings of the study. And we walked street by street and over all the 200 wards in Chennai. We looked at demographics, business activities, material flow, and we built a map, an interactive portal to kind of show this data. All of that is part of this. One thing that became very clear from the data was that there were three very clear typologies. And these guys that we found were collecting 130,000 tons of recyclable waste every year. So that's about 24% of what the city generates, millions of dollars worth of paper, plastic, glass, and metal. We found what we call, so we define waste pickers in the way we looked at the movement. We defined waste pickers as level 0 aggregators. So waste pickers who walked the street or had a tricycle, who picked up the material at no input cost. In Chennai, we found 2,000 level 1 aggregators. So these were guys who are material agnostic, set up within the city. They were buying feedstock from waste pickers, but they were also buying in very much parts from residents and commercial shops in that area as well. And then these folks were then selling to kind of, you can call them informal material recovery facilities. And we found close to 300 in Chennai who were more specialized, who were doing pre-processing, who, like, for example, baling, or they were shredding, something serious, which was then very important for the ultimate off-taker to handle. It's not like the off-taker can go and buy from the level 1 aggregators. They have to buy from the level 2 aggregators. This is the map and how it looks. What I love about this level 1 aggregator map is that this could be a map of, I don't know, barber shops in Chennai, ATMs in Chennai, pharmacies in Chennai. Like, they're all independent actors, they have their own like networks, but they're private entrepreneurs. And they've essentially built like a whole supply chain for themselves to make sure that they are close to where material is and that they can collect it. And when I show this map to people, I'm able to start talking about thinking of the informal supply chain as infrastructure. Like, each dot is a small scrap shop that has storage space, that has capacity to store material, handle new material, bill, check volumes, check if like the guy is giving the right material. Is all based, they're all working on a mass balance based approach. They're buying kgs and selling kgs. They don't, they're already optimized to do a lot of collections. And then the level 2 guys, and again, I should probably put a heat map on this, but you see them as clusters. There's like a plastic cluster, there's a paper cluster, there's a metal cluster, and they are all set up along major highways where weighbridges are present, all of that kind of stuff, because from there material can move very long distances. And so they are also perfectly set up for big regional off-takers to kind of take advantage of them and things like that. What are the major materials that they were collecting? A lot of paper, a lot of plastic, a lot of glass, a lot of metal. Within plastics, PP and PE, rigids, PET was collected in high detail. And again, it's just, I won't go through this again, but this is the idea of like, what are some of the key data points that helped us cluster these aggregators into these different, like into almost like a process flow kind of approach, how they sit in the supply chain. Okay, so that's the part 1. Part 2 is, okay, so once we did this mapping, again, my initial goal was to collect the data, but the data was very, very interesting. I felt that even from a private sector perspective, there was a lot of interest in finding feedstock, where can we get plastics? Where can we do this? Where can we do that? So KC evolved to now what we, the last few years, we say we provide these 4 types of products. One around mapping, it's always the baseline. There's always a lot of discovery that needs to happen in different cities for either a big PRO or a research organization or an off-taker looking to build a plant in the region. They need to know what's going on there. And for us, we were taken to Indonesia by this French waste management company called Veolia in 2018, I think. And like, we were amazed to see the philosophy of level 0, level 1, and level 2 holding there. It's almost like the supply chain has, like, from the ground up, trying to optimize around material, like it's a very low value, high volume material, recycling. And so I honestly think that, again, when you look at that map, like, these guys are building a decentralized procurement network, purely where the economics have worked out in some way that everybody is able to make a little bit of money. I think more money has to be provided into the supply chain, but it's very effective. Local feedback loops, local collection systems. It's quite fascinating. People are actually competing for waste pickers. Like, if a scrap shop that has more waste pickers loyal to that person makes more money. There's a lot of stickiness amongst these level 0, level 1, level 2 guys. So the second element, the other thing, sorry, why mapping is also interesting is, that 130,000 tons in Chennai I was talking about. So they don't use normal language they've built their own language to kind of like do the calculation of, so they don't say PP and P, they say Bommai plastic. Bommai literally translates to toy in Tamil. And then in Indonesia, they have another name. They call something else Ember, and plus something else. Like it's like language and local context really matter. And these guys have trained their guys into finding these types of media. There's a fascinating discovery element around like what taxonomy they use, but the data, the surveys also very much reveal how they call different things, like things, the names change a little bit in some cases between an L1 and L2. There's a lot of fascinating stuff there. That stuff is very critical for traceability though. And so that's our next project, our product, which is around digitalization. So we did this very interesting thing in Indonesia, where on behalf of Veolia, who's a PET plant, they're setting up bottle to bottle, where we did a digitalization kind of like intervention in a level 2 guy, somebody who was selling 50 tons a month, 50 to 75 tons a month to them. And so that video is actually on our website. I won't go through that, but traceability is like a key service that we look at when we work. And then the third, it's kind of like, it's like builds in more complexity. The third is around procurement guarantees, and that's a different beast. Procurement guarantees, like, can we get, like a 5,000 ton a year contract that we can build up, along with, let's say, a first investment decision that an off-taker is doing. That's a big thing. I mean, the biggest client that we have that we're very excited to work with is Shell on this topic, where we're looking at a kind of like a pilot intervention of X number of tons and delivery to see like how it would look. And why for us this was also a very interesting engagement, the Shell one, is because we've been tasked to also look very closely at Shell's like health and safety compliance framework, and see what that would mean at a level 2 shop, what that would mean at a level 1 shop, and come up with strategies of like how you could ultimately build compliance and compliance protocols into this informal supply chain. The fourth, it's a very ambitious thing. Again, it's at a very low tech readiness level, but like we have a hypothesis where we believe that if we got this local scrap shop and their waste pickers to organize like last mile waste collection, then ultimately it could be a cheaper product offering to the municipality, because taking advantage of decentralized collection loops. And so we have a pilot in Mylapore, which was funded by Expo 2020, where we've been working with 1 scrap shop and 2 waste pickers to organize last mile collection of plastics from 1,500 households, like basically 30 apartments. And we've been running that for 3 years. And so one of the things that we can show is like, you can trust the scrap shop and the waste picker to organize collection, which is already a very exciting data point. But we're looking to grow that tech readiness level to include like collection of all materials as a pilot, and see what the data shows us. Like you say, hey, when we're collecting in these local feedback loops, let's say for 50 streets of a ward, are we actually able to save price, like per kg, I mean, or what we really want to learn from increasing our tech readiness level on this collection idea that we have. We'll go through this. Like I said, we were initially grant funded. My background is in data science and development sector. So I worked very closely with folks who knew a lot about grant funding and things like that. But then recently our work has been driven in a commercial way. Big kind of commercial insight was provided when we did a lot of work with Veolia, but now more recently also with Shell and Saint-Gobain, we're doing some interesting stuff, and we're learning a lot, honestly, on how these guys are thinking about things. So for us, we have a proposed pathway long term for how we can integrate this informal waste supply chain. The first is enumeration. We think it's like the key thing. We need to know where they are, what they do, like what is the value in the supply chain, how much volume of what, all these kinds of elements. And then we need to immediately integrate these folks into social protection systems that are already there or need to be built. Along with that, you can look at also traceable procurement, investing into site compliance and things like that. And then ultimately, to make sure that the waste picker does not have to choose between health and livelihood by putting their hand in unsanitary situations, is to work on the dignified collection, where you get the waste picker to directly pick up from the source. And so, yeah, I mean, we are a very global South focused company. We know from the literature that there's a lot of cities and countries in the world that have informal supply chains. And so one of our big goals is to go and like map in these places and see how it connects to this philosophy we have about level 0, level 1, level 2. So again, my background is in research a lot. So one of the things we've been doing on this idea of level 0, level 1, level 2 is publishing on it and kind of trying to build provenance on that. And so again, a very interesting project we're doing is with the Norwegian Institute of Water Research, where they're actually incorporating our language into explaining, into their structures of understanding informality and things like that. Even with Veolia, we integrated this idea of level 0, level 1, level 2 into their approach in their process plant. So these are big wins for us, because we're able to try to be more evidence-based, more methodological, I think, on the local context, and then how this supply chain ultimately works, because it's a very, very important aspect of inclusion. The fact that we are able to put them in the right position in the supply chain and show them what their, show people what their value is actually. And again, one of our goals, like the communication, we want to map 100 cities in the next 5 years. We've become quite good at mapping, and like we are able to go and map very quickly. Like, so for example, like a big city like Bombay, if we were to go in cold, we could commit to a client like, hey, in 6 months, you're going to have, at least maybe a very good data set, basically. And so, we are looking now not just at the data collection aspect, but the management, visuals of it, the alerts, reports, the updation of data, all of this through a product that we call ISWM Track, Integrated Solid Waste Management Tracker. Spatial, which is my background, is a key element of this dashboard. And we're ultimately trying to build it to an open source framework, so that we can bring down the cost of data collection as much as we can over time. But yeah, that's essentially it. Again, why is data so important? We know this adage, of course, we cannot manage what we cannot measure, but there's a lot of studies that say there's a lack of data that's really affecting what people are able to do at the local level. There's a lot of good top level stuff, but local level, even just price setting, small things get really messed up because of a lack of data. And this is the ward that I'm from in Chennai, and this is just to give you a sense of like what kind of data you can collect, what kind of insight you can get from collecting good data on the ground, like collection routes. Ultimately, we realized that the municipality doesn't have very good data on the formal systems as well. They don't know where their composting pits are, what their capacity is. So you like ISWM Track can map formal infrastructure as well. and excuse me. It's just it's very, very important data that is missing right now. And again, what is another very interesting use case of ISWM Track is for the development of guideline EPR that's coming in Southeast Asia. And even not just the development, but also the ultimate monitoring of it, where these kind of data sets can be really critical for stakeholders looking at kind of measuring, is our intervention going for a just transition of the informal sector? Is it doing the best it can? All of those kinds of things, like we are able to support with data. So yeah, I'll stop here, and looking forward to your thoughts and comments. And yeah, I will share the presentation, of course, with everyone through through SUS Mafia.